Okay, so hey there guys. So today's video is going to be more of a hands-on collection of my eyeshadow palettes. I really wanted to do like an in-depth collection on all of my palettes and tell you guys my thoughts on every single palette I own in my collection. I am such a huge fan of eyeshadow palettes. Eyeshadows are just my favorite thing in makeup. I am such a collector of eyeshadow palettes. And I just really wanted to tell you guys my thoughts of every single eyeshadow palette I have. So let's get started. Okay guys, so let's dive into the palette drawer and talk about all of my palettes. So in the front, I have all of my Too Faced palettes. So the first palette I have is the Too Faced Glitter Bomb palette. And I did get this palette for a pretty good price at Marshall. So that's why I really wanted to try this palette. Forgive me for all the one-handedness that I'm going to have to do in this video, but this is the only way I could really film it. So first off, I love the packaging of this palette. I love how there's like movable glitter in the front. I think that is so freaking adorable. So this is what the palette actually looks like. So it comes with 8 glitter shades, and then you have this brightening base and this intensifying base. I've never used the bases for the palette, but I've used every single shade in this palette, either on my lid or on my inner corners. And I can say I really do like these glitters. I think they're really, really pretty. They're not the most like intense glitters you'll ever use, which I kind of was a little bit underwhelmed by because I kind of thought they would be, since it's a glitter bomb palette, like it's supposed to be super glittery. The bottom row I really love on my lid. I think all these colors are really beautiful. I just use Rosé all day and work it in a look, and I sometimes use Oh It's On my inner corners. And Fairy Dust is a really beautiful inner corner shade. And Splash is a really beautiful shade on the lid. And Confetti is as well. But Hot Damn and Glitter Goals, I was kind of underwhelmed by those two shades when I used them. So I kind of make it my business to reach for this palette at least once or twice a month to use the glitters. So I got to just use it more. So that is the first one. So then we have, of course, all of my Chocolate Bar palettes. So, of course, we have the OG original Chocolate Bar palette. So I feel like most makeup collectors have this palette in their collection, so it's kind of like sacrilege not to mention these palettes. You guys know I'm not really the hugest fan of Too Faced anymore, but I still have these palettes in my collection. Just trying to get the packaging off. So this is the Too Faced Chocolate Bar palette. It's not my favorite color scheme for a neutral palette, honestly. I really don't find myself reaching for any of these shades on the right. I mostly use these 6 shades when I do a look with this palette, or when I even am able to reach for it. I love Salted Caramel and Marzipan and Creme Brulee. They're some of the most beautiful shades ever. And I love Semi-Sweet and Milk Chocolate and White Chocolate and Champagne Truffle. Those are pretty much the only shades I use out of this palette anymore. I don't really touch Strawberry Bonbons or this purple. I've never actually used, or any of these shades. I've never used this green either. So out of all of my Chocolate Bar palettes, or any of these palettes that I have in my drawer, this is probably the palette that I've never used every single shade in this palette. Because honestly, I can say out of all these other palettes in this drawer, I've used every single shade. So I guess that kind of tells you something, but I swear Marzipan and Creme Brulee are some of the most gorgeous Too Faced shadows you'll ever use. There's such a unique, beautiful, shimmery formula, and I just definitely love the Chocolate Bar formula the most in this palette. I just wish you had more neutral options in this, because I feel like if this was an all neutral palette, this would be like probably my holy grail neutral palette, but I feel like since you have these shades, like I don't typically use those. So Jesus, why am I hitting my camera? So that is the Chocolate Bar. So that's the first one, and then of course we have the Semi-Sweet Chocolate Bar palette, which is the second one. I think everybody knows this, but you know, for people that don't, this is the Semi-Sweet. The Chocolate Bar I got like the day after my boyfriend got the Semi-Sweet Chocolate Bar palette for me for Valentine's Day. I just always gravitate towards using the Chocolate Bar palettes for Valentine's Day because I always, you know, think chocolate. I think this was the only one I used around Chocolate Bar weekend, around Valentine's Day weekend. I used the Naked Cherry palette when I did a Valentine's Day look this year. I do love mousse and peanut butter. As you guys can see, those have the 2 largest dips in them. I use those two shades in my crease every single time I use this palette. Also, Coconut Cream's a gorgeous brow bone highlight, and Butter Pecan is a beautiful inner corner highlight. I love caramel, bonbon, frosting, hot fudge, truffled pudding, rum raisin. But all the rest of these I really don't use, like licorice, cocoa, chili, pink sugar, and blueberry swirl. But I have used all of them. But Nougat doesn't really perform as well as the other mattes do. So this used to be my Holy Grail neutral palette, but I don't really feel the same anymore. As you guys know, I did recently film a Holy Grail video with XO Marley, so definitely check that out. But this is not like my all-time favorite palette anymore, and I can tell that the formula has kind of changed in these palettes since I've had them for a few years now. But I'll never get rid of them. And then of course the last chocolate bar palette that I collected from Too Faced. I know they have the white chocolate bar palette, but I had no interest in that palette. This is the Too Faced Chocolate Bonbons palette. This was like the last palette I was really interested in because I think that the color schemes for these palettes were so much better than the white chocolate bar. I don't know what Too Faced was thinking about that white chocolate bar palette, but anyway, this is the Chocolate Bonbons. This is definitely my all-time favorite packaging from Too Faced. How beautiful is that? How cute is it? It's like a Mean Girls palette to me, and the reason why is because they have a shade called Totally Fetch in there, which is obviously from Mean Girls. I think everyone on the face of this planet has seen that movie. So this is the Chocolate Bonbons palette, and I think this is such a gorgeous palette. This is probably one of my favorites from Too Faced as well. This one's definitely not as loved as the original chocolate bar, but the neutrals in here are really beautiful. And I find that I have used a lot more shades in this palette than the original. I think the only two shades I've never used from this palette is Earl Grey and Black Currant. But I've used every single other shade. I use Almond Truffle and Cashew Chew every time I do a transition with this palette. I love Mocha in the crease and Bordeaux, and Molasses Chip is a beautiful lid shade. And I love Divinity on the brow bone, which is this one right here. Beautiful shade. These are all beautiful shades. So, and I've even used like Totally Fetch and Cotton Candy for like a pink look. So this is definitely a really good palette as well. I just don't really use it that much anymore. Alright, so then the next Too Faced palette, and the last one that's kind of shaped like the chocolate bar palettes, is of course the infamous Sweet Peach palette. This palette caused a lot of controversy from Too Faced, and I feel like people just kind of forgot about that, but I'm not really going to go into it. You guys can look that up if you want. But this is the Too Faced Sweet Peach palette. I would be lying if I didn't love the packaging on this because it's so freaking cute. And I would be lying if I said that I didn't like this palette. It is a really good palette. It's one of my favorites from Too Faced as well. I love Puree, Summer Yum, Charmed, I'm sure. I've used most of these shades. I think the only ones that I haven't used is Tempting. I think I haven't used Delectable, but I think every single other shade in this palette I've used. As you can see, Luscious is my favorite. I love that shade. It's so freaking stunning. I had thought at one point that I had hit pan on the shade, but it doesn't look like I did. I've never hit pan on a Too Faced palette. But it's such a beautiful eyeshadow. But this one is the Peach palette. Yes, it has a very strong scent, but you can create a lot of beautiful looks with this. I just wish it had more peach shades in it. Like, I don't understand what, like, this whole cool toned Bless Her Heart and all these shades here are really doing in this palette. I mean, Bellini, Puree, and Summer Yum, yes, but all of these, I don't really understand them. Like the rest of these, like I would have probably stopped the palette at Summer Yum and just got rid of the rest of these and Peach Pet. But these three and this one I don't really get, but they're really cute. It is a really good palette. I would be lying if I said I didn't like this palette. So that is the Sweet Peach. Let me see if I can put this away. Yes, I can. Cool beans. Alright, and then to round out the last Too Faced palette in here, I kind of got eyeshadow on my finger. We have the Too Faced Vegas Nay Stardust palette. And this is actually a really, really good palette. It has a lot of beautiful neutral tones in here. It has Selfie and Showgirl. It has these really beautiful shades for nighttime, which I actually have used this palette for day to night. I think I possibly had taken off the lid shade that I had used and then replaced it with another lid shade. I'm getting that brown eyeshadow all over me. But it looks like poop, doesn't it? So gross. But I definitely have used this palette for day to night before, and I think it makes a great palette for that. So if you guys got your hands on this, I think this is the best collab palette they came out with. I wanted the Nikki Tutorials one, but I didn't think it would be half as good as this one, and I heard a lot of controversy about that palette as well, so I never picked it up. But I had never even heard of Vegas Nay before this collaboration, but this was their first collaboration palette, and I definitely was not disappointed with it. I thought it was a really good palette. Okay, so now let's get into the Urban Decay Naked palettes. As you guys can see, I have 5 of them. I have the original 3, and then I have the Naked Heat and the Naked Cherry. So let's get into the Naked palette. Of course, this is the cult classic OG palette. A lot of people love this palette. I actually really like this palette as well. I think that this is the best OG palette from Urban Decay. And I actually really love the packaging. I know they've updated the packaging and they've discontinued this palette because they came out with the Reloaded palette. But honestly, I have no interest in that palette. I think that the color scheme for this palette was much better. The only thing that I would say about the Naked palettes is that they definitely lack more crease shades than the Too Faced Chocolate Bar palettes. They kind of really concentrated on the shimmers back then. But all of these shimmers are stunning. They all perform beautifully. All of these shades honestly perform really, really stunning. Like, there's not a bad shade in this palette. They're all very consistent. And Naked and Buck are really beautiful standard crease shades that you could use with any eyeshadow in here. So the mattes do work with pretty much every shade in this palette. I love Virgin on the brow bone. I love Sin on the inner corners. I just used Toasted the last time I used this palette, and it was gorgeous. So you're always going to get a good look out of this palette, and I definitely think this is my favorite out of the 3 original ones. But what's funny is that I didn't get this one until I got the Naked 2 and 3 already. This was the last one I purchased, but I was like really tempted to have all 3 of them just for collector's purposes. But I do use this when I can, and I have used it a ton. It's not like it's a palette that I don't use. So it is a really good palette. So that is the original Naked palette. It is a very good palette, in my opinion. Then, of course, we have the Naked 2 palette. I actually just whipped this out yesterday and used it, which was kind of crazy. This palette is very hard to open one-handed. Give me a sec. So, this is the Naked 2 palette. Again, it kind of lacks the crease shades that you would typically find in like the newer palettes from Urban Decay. But I used this yesterday and it was beautiful. I used Tease in the crease, and then I darkened up the crease with Snake Bite. Then I used Busted and Blackout on the outer corners, and then Foxy on the brow bone. And I put a little bit of Verve on the lid with a little bit of ColourPop's Liberty, and it was beautiful. I love using this for like silver tone looks. But again, it just lacks crease shades, which is kind of annoying. There's beautiful brow bone highlights in here, and this is a very neutral side in the palette, and then it kind of gets more cool toned and silvery towards the end. And again, the formula is solid in these palettes. This is a beautiful formula as well, and the shimmery shades are gorgeous. I just wish it had more mattes in this palette, so that's the only thing I think that this palette lacks. Alright, and then we have the Naked 3. I just took it out of the box, so it'd be easier to show you guys. So this is the Naked 3 palette. This used to be my favorite Urban Decay palette, and it's still one of my favorites. I just don't really typically reach for it. Do you like my Nicktoons pajama shirt? I'm still wearing my pajama shirt, yes. But these have beautiful rosy tones in it, and it's still one of my favorite palettes to use. This was my original first neutral palette ever. I thought that I didn't need any other neutral palette, and now I have like 30 neutral palettes in my collection. But after I got the 3 Naked palettes, I felt like I should collect more neutral palettes. But this was the palette I felt that I really needed, and the only palette that I felt that I really needed. My boyfriend got this for me for Christmas in December 2015, I believe, or 14, and I just was obsessed with this palette. I would use it all the time. And it does have better crease shades. Limit and Nooner pretty much work with every single shade in this palette, but again, there's only 3 mattes in this palette. So now we're going to get to the Naked Heat palette. Okay, so now we have the Naked Heat palette. So that is the outer packaging, which I love. And then, of course, the inner packaging is even cooler. I love it. And then we're going to open it. These are so hard to open one-handed. So this is the Naked Heat. And as you guys can see, Urban Decay really decided to add more mattes to their collection of Naked palettes and in their palettes. And honestly, I love the shades in here. You guys know that this is my favorite Naked palette. I love the Naked Heat palette. There are so many beautiful mattes in this palette. They have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 mattes and, well, actually 7. And then you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 shimmery shades. I kind of wish there was one more shimmery shade in this palette, but at the same time, I kind of don't because I feel like these all work beautifully. The only thing that I wish this palette had was an inner corner highlight, because then it would be like my Holy Grail warm neutral palette. But I do have to grab for other shades for my inner corners, because I feel like the shades in here are a little bit too dark for my inner corners. The only one that's kind of light for my inner corners is Ounce. But you guys know, since this has a much more of a selection of mattes in these palettes, in this one, in the Cherry palette, I feel like this palette is my favorite still. I love it so freaking much. This is my favorite Naked palette. I use it all the time. Okay, and then to round out the Naked palettes, we have the Urban Decay Naked Cherry. That's the outer packaging. And then, of course, this is the inner packaging. I've been using this palette a ton recently. And a lot of people have been liking this palette. Again, you guys know my thoughts. Why was this palette called the Cherry palette? It should have been called the Berries palette. It would have been such a better name for it. But I really love this palette, you guys. I've been using it like crazy the past 2 months because I really wanted to get a lot of use out of it. I'm so happy that Chip got this for me and I could try it. Again, there's a really beautiful selection of mattes in here and beautiful selection of shimmers. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 mattes. And we have, actually 7, excuse me, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 beautiful shimmers. The shimmers in this palette are so freaking stunning. Ambitious is beautiful. Turn On is beautiful. Bang Bang's a beautiful peach. Young Love is a beautiful pink. And Drunk Dial is this gorgeous brown pink duochrome shade. You have to put it on your eyes to see how beautiful it is. But I really like this palette. The mattes are a little bit harder to work with, but I do really love the looks that I come up with every time I use this palette. So I've been loving this palette lately. Alright, since we're still talking about Naked palettes, I wanted to take a moment to talk about the Urban Decay Naked Ultimate Basics palette before we move on with the rest of the palettes in this row, since this is part of the Naked series and we're still talking about the Naked palette. So this is the Naked Ultimate Basics palette. Since I never purchased the first 2 Naked Basics palettes because I felt like I never needed them, I got this one. So this is the Naked Ultimate Basics, and I actually really like this palette a lot. It is a beautiful matte palette. I have not touched it this year yet though, but I'm going to use this when I want a really simple neutral eye, when I go to my boyfriend's house or something, or when I just want really light makeup. This is a gorgeous matte palette. It really is a beautiful palette for someone that doesn't really like to wear like super vibrant colors on their eyes. It's really beautiful for someone that just needs a really basic matte palette. I think that this is a gorgeous one. All the mattes are just perform beautifully in here. I've used mostly all of them. I think the only one that I haven't used is Magnet. But other than that, I pretty much have used every single shade. I use almost all of these every single time I use this palette. I always use Nudie, Commando, Tempted, Faith, Lockout, Extra Bitter, Pregame, and Blow. I pretty much use this half of the palette the majority of the time that I use the palette. Instinct and Lethal I have used as well, but they're all beautiful quality. They're all that beautiful matte formula that we love from Urban Decay. So this is a really good palette. It's very underrated, but I love it. It's a really good palette. So now let's get into some of these palettes back here. So that we have the Lorac Mega Pro palette. If I can freaking open it. I really wish I had a better camera. I'm sorry, you guys. So I recently put this back in my drawer because I kind of wanted to give it another shot before I actually put it in my graveyard again. Because this was a palette that I put in my graveyard shelf recently, last year. Because I really don't love this palette all that much. I mean, yes, the eyeshadows perform really nicely and they are very pigmented. but I feel like they're a little bit too pigmented, that they're kind of harder to blend. And I've never been like too impressed with Lorac as a brand, and this is like the only eyeshadow palette that I have from them. But I still haven't used it yet because I just have so many palettes that I reach for over this one. But these two palettes, I really do have to make it my business to use this one and the Ultimate Basics. So that's it for Lorac. That's the only Lorac palette that I own. So now we have my one and only Kat Von D palette that I have in this drawer. I know there's a lot of controversy about Kat Von D, but I'm not going to get rid of something that I spent my money on. That is always my mentality. I just don't have to support her brand anymore by buying anything from her anymore, because I'm definitely not going to be buying anything from her anymore. I feel like I'm saying anything, like not anything. I don't know. It sounds really weird to me. But this is, of course, the cult classic Shade Light Eye palette. This was everywhere for a really, really long time. And now you see a ton of these in TJ Maxx, which honestly is kind of crazy to me. But this is the Kat Von D Shade Light Eye palette. Again, it's one of those pairing palettes, just like the Ultimate Basics palette. It's just an all matte palette. But honestly, I really don't find myself reaching for this or the Basics palette when I have so many single shadows. But I do reach for this more than the Naked Basics palette. I definitely use this a couple of times a year because I really love the quad in the middle, because I love those for like silver looks. I love this for like more neutral looks, and I love this for more like warmer looks. So they really do work beautifully together, and I love pairing these with single eyeshadows. So it is a very good palette. I do love the formula of Kat Von D's eyeshadows. They are really, really good, and I really like that palette as well. I do enjoy it. Then we have the very controversial Huda Beauty palette. Again, this is another very controversial brand to me, but Chip did get this for me in our Christmas makeup swap, and I have to say that I actually really love this palette. I have used every single shade in the palette on my lid and in my crease, and honestly, the mattes blend beautifully. They are so pigmented and they blend out beautifully. The topper shades are some of the most beautiful lid shades I've ever used in a palette. Daydream, Crave, what is this? Fantasy. Those are like some of my favorites. Charmed is gorgeous. It's a beautiful duochrome green purple. It's just a very unique palette. The mattes just blend seamlessly. They're all super pigmented, but they all don't like muddy together like Kat Von D shadows do, or Anastasia. So this palette is really, really good. This has been one of my favorite palettes I've used, and I feel like it's kind of my replacement for the Modern Renaissance. Speaking of the Modern Renaissance, this is my OG, my Ride or Die Anastasia Modern Renaissance. So this is still the only palette that I've ever gotten from Anastasia Beverly Hills. And you know that this palette has been through a lot. And the reason why I keep my palettes in their packaging is because it's a lot easier to keep the palettes clean. That's why my palette's really clean on the outside. So as you guys can see, this is a very well-loved palette from me. It was my holy grail for a while. I have hit pan on 5 shades in this palette. It made me very proud to hit pan on some of these shades because I was working on panning some of these shades for a while. I have pan on Tempera, Vermeer, Primavera, Venetian Red, and Cypress Umber. So this is the most pan I have in any palette. For the first year or two that I had this palette, I didn't have any pan except for Primavera and Vermeer, which I hit pan on like last July, and then I hit pan on Tempera, Venetian Red, and Cypress Umber after that. Cypress Umber has the biggest pan size because that's the one I use on my outer corners every single time I use the palette. But it's a beautiful palette, but I just noticed that the formula is changing quite a bit. It's starting to not perform as well as it used to, so I kind of have stopped using this palette, but I will never get rid of it because it's one of my most used palettes and one of my most well-loved palettes. I am kind of thinking about replacing an Anastasia palette with a new one, but honestly, none of them really interest me all that much. Like, I feel like I have so many palettes in my collection that I don't really have to replace certain eyeshadows or certain palettes when I have so many palettes anyway. Like, what's the point of doing that, you know? So now I have the Jouer Skinny Dip palette. This is one of the most underrated palettes. You guys know how much I actually rave about this freaking palette. Oh my god, if I could open it, that would be amazing. So first off, the packaging is everything. It's so beautiful and stunning. So these are the 6 shades in this palette. And honestly, I feel like if someone is looking for a solid shimmer foily eyeshadow palette to pair with mattes like the Kat Von D Shade and Light or the Naked Ultimate Basics palette or the Viseart Warm Neutral Matte palette, I feel like this is your guy. These eyeshadows are freaking stunning. I've never seen pressed eyeshadows perform like this besides like the colored Raine eyeshadows. I feel like they're a very similar formula, but I feel like these are even more intense. And they are beautiful. This is one of my Holy Grail palettes for shimmer. I should have mentioned this in my Holy Grail video, but I really just wanted to pick 2 palettes that I couldn't live without. But this palette is so bomb, so beautiful. Skinny Dip is everything. Starlight, Magic Hour, Tan Lines. They are just so foiled and beautiful. I feel like everyone should give this palette a shot. I don't know why. I don't know why this palette wasn't as talked about as mostly a lot of Jouer's products are talked about, because they trend a lot with other products, but this one was not really mentioned by a lot of people. And this is my favorite thing that I've ever tried from Jouer. I don't really love their blush palette too much. I like their concealer, but this is definitely by far the best thing I've ever tried from Jouer. It is just on another level. It is so freaking stunning. I love that palette. Alright, speaking of colored Raine, this is the next palette we're talking about. This is the outer packaging for it. This is the colored Raine Queen of Hearts palette. Now, I always find people that are comparing colored Raine to like Juvia's Place. And honestly, that is my most viewed video on YouTube. And it's crazy. Like, thank you so much. But I kind of just did that video on a whim. And it ended up being my most viewed video on YouTube. I did also compare this palette to the Modern Renaissance palette. And every time I would pick this palette. This is one of my Holy Grail palettes as well. It's such a beautiful palette. Like, if I had to pick my top 3 favorite palettes in my collection, it would be the Lime Crime Venus, the ColourPop Dream St, and the Colored Raine Queen of Hearts. This palette is on another level. It just blends gorgeously. The mattes in here are stunning. The lid shades are, again, that beautiful foiled formula, and they are stunning. Your Majesty's a gorgeous gold. Noblewoman's a beautiful red. These are such beautiful crease shades. I just freaking love this palette. I can't rave about it enough. This is definitely my favorite thing I've ever tried from Colored Raine. I only have their lip paints, but this is definitely the star of Colored Raine for me. Like, if you try anything from Colored Raine, this palette is still one of my all-time favorites. Okay, so the next palette, like I mentioned, is one of my all-time favorites. This is the, oh my god, where can I put this? The Venus XL palette by Lime Crime. If I could open it too. Jesus Christ. This is the Lime Crime Venus XL palette. I'm just going to put it down here. Like, I can't hold everything anymore. This is one of my all-time favorites. I've raved about this palette a million times. I freaking love Lime Crime's formula. They are some of the best eyeshadows I've ever used. This is definitely my favorite Lime Crime palette by far. I just love these shades. The mattes are stunning. The lid shades are stunning. If you guys want to see more of my thoughts on this palette, check out my Holy Grail video, but it's phenomenal. I love this palette. This kind of just trumps all of those high-end palettes and other palettes that I was talking about because it's the best quality-wise. And then, of course, I want to talk about my 2 Venus palettes while I'm on Lime Crime. I might as well mention these 2 palettes as well. So, of course, I have the Lime Crime Venus 1 palette. And this is also one of my all-time favorite palettes. These mattes are unreal, how pigmented they are and how beautifully they blend out. I wish that this palette had more lid shades in here, though. Like, there are 5 mattes in this palette and only 3 lid shades. Aura is such a beautiful inner corner shade, and Shell is a beautiful lid shade, and Venus is a beautiful lid shade. I do love pairing this palette with the Venus XL palette with some of those like orangey colors in it. But I find that I can create so many looks with this palette only having 8 shades in this palette. So it's a great palette. I just love it so freaking much. And then, of course, I have the Lime Crime Venus 2 palette. Honestly, this is probably my least favorite palette out of the three because I just don't find myself inspired by this palette. I mean, I can create quite a few looks out of it, and I've pretty much used every single shade out of the palette. And I've used every single shade in the other two Lime Crime palettes, obviously. These mattes are beautiful, but I find that they kind of muddy up a little bit more than the other two palettes. I feel like the first palette's definitely more high quality than this one. I don't know, I just feel like this palette is kind of random, but at the same time, it is a beautiful palette. So this is a good palette as well, if you kind of like more cool tone, grungy looks. So while we're on these palettes here, we might as well talk about these up front first. So the first palette we have here is the Viseart Warm Neutral Matte Palette. I mostly got this palette because of Stephanie Nicole. She would always mention it as one of her favorite palettes ever. I'm not going to open this palette up because you can see the shades through the cover, so I really don't have to open it. So basically, it is an all matte palette. At first, I didn't really see what the special thing was about these palettes, about these mattes. I just thought they kind of performed like my Makeup Geek shadows, but then the more and more I used them, the more and more I really did love this formula. This is a very beautiful matte formula. I just don't think it's worth the ridiculous price tag. I feel like most makeup that's really expensive isn't worth it. And now these palettes are on sale on Sephora for like $60 rather than $80, which is a lot more reasonable. But I got this during Sephora's 20% off in like 2017, I believe. But it is they are really beautiful mattes. I've used every single shade in this palette, and they do blend beautifully. I just need to use it more often. I really haven't used it for a while. I've only used it like once this year, and I used to use it a lot more. I just have a lot of new palettes in my collection, so. Then I have my one and only NARS palette. This is the NARS Narcissist Loaded palette. I was super excited to get this palette when I first got it. I believe I got it with a $25 coupon when I got it, for like the $25 off, like 50 or something, or 75 or whatever. That coupon usually comes out during Christmas time. So this is the packaging. It's such cool mirrored packaging. I love NARS as a brand. I actually really do like this palette a lot. These shadows are actually gorgeous. The mattes blend beautifully. The lid shades are stunning. The gold is definitely my favorite. I mean, what else is new? I love these two shades as well. I love this like beautiful bronzy shade. I love this red, this brown. This shade on the inner corners is stunning. It's kind of like a dupe for, or it really reminds me of Max Nylon. But yeah, this is a really good palette. So if you haven't tried NARS eyeshadows, they are a bit pricey, but if you get one of their palettes, I feel like it's more worth it, because this was like $59, which is still up there in price, but not as bad as their single eyeshadows. So now we have a couple of palettes over here. This is my one and only Makeup Geek palette. This is the Manny MUA Makeup Geek palette. Yes, I am not a supporter of Manny MUA anymore. But I did support him back in 2017, and I did purchase this palette. This palette is a beautiful palette, though. The only thing that kind of annoys me about this palette is the fact that, oh, maybe I am really close to hitting pan on this. I'm trying to hit pan on this dang shade, Luna. I've been trying to hit pan on that shade for a long time. I'm going to try and hit pan on it by the end of this year. But anyway, the only reason why I have a used up eyeshadow in this palette is because that was my transition shade, Beaches and Cream. But there are a couple of repeat shades in here. So there is Beaches and Cream, Cosmopolitan, and Frappe, which are all permanent shades for Makeup Geek. But Makeup Geek kind of does that with their collaborations, where they only come out with like a few shades from the creator, and there's only 5 shades in here that were new. Actually 6, I believe. It was this one, Mars, Aphrodite, Sora, Artemis, and Luna, and they're all stunning. This is such a beautiful palette. Makeup Geek still has a very solid eyeshadow formula, so if you're looking for more inexpensive eyeshadows, Makeup Geek makes amazing eyeshadows. They're definitely like some of the best quality eyeshadows I use. This palette is so good though. Like, they blend so easily. Mars is a stunning red. Aphrodite is a beautiful outer corner shade. Sora is a gorgeous crease shade. I use that one the most when I use this palette. Artemis is a beautiful inner corner highlight, and Luna is a beautiful lid shade, and so is Insomnia. Beautiful shade. So this is a very high quality palette for the price. Then we have, of course, my 3 ColourPop palettes. We have ColourPop's Kathleen Lights and ColourPop's Kathleen Lights palette in Dream Street, or the Dream Street palette. Again, this is getting very hard to open everything one-handed. So this is the palette. You guys know I did mention this in my Holy Grail palette as well. I love this palette so much. I just used it this weekend. It's just one of my favorites. It's so stunning. The mattes in here just blend beautifully. The shimmer shades, ColourPop shimmer shades, are so stunning. I love all of these shades. I've used every single one. One of my favorite palettes, so I really can't rave about that palette enough. It's one of my all-time faves. Then we have the ColourPop Zodiac. This is the outer packaging for the Dream Street. So, of course, we have the Zodiac from Kathleen Lights as well. So this one, again, super, super cute packaging. I love this packaging. This is probably my favorite packaging for a ColourPop palette. It's just so freaking cute, and one of my favorite packagings ever for a palette. So these are the 12 shades that come in here. So these are all, obviously, Zodiac signs, and they're all stunning shades. The one that I would say I'm the most disappointed by is the Aquarius, which is kind of crazy because that's Kathleen's sign. But that was the only shadow in this palette that I was really underwhelmed by. The rest of these shades perform beautifully. Gemini is such a stunning lid shade. So is the Cancer, the Leo, the Pisces is gorgeous, the Scorpio, those are, and the Aries, all beautiful lid shades, and the Capricorn's really beautiful in the outer corners. And then the mattes, the Libra, the Virgo, the Taurus, and the Sagittarius. I raved about this in my last favorites video. I used it a ton, and it is stunning, stunning, stunning. And then the last ColourPop palette I have is the Disney Designer Collection It's a Princess Thing palette. And this is obviously the Disney palette that was inspired by 6 Disney princesses. And oh my god, if I could freaking open it. Jesus. So this is the ColourPop Disney palette. So it has the 6 princesses on it. And you guys know I did do a full review on this palette, and I've raved about it before. I love this palette. It's such a beautiful neutral palette. This is a really good palette for beginners, I feel like. The top row is all mattes. The second row is all beautiful shimmers, and the last row is also a lot of shimmers and some glittery eyeshadows, and they're all so freaking stunning. I love the formula of this palette. Ray and Prince Charming and One Kiss are my favorite shades, and they're all so beautiful. And Thingamabob is a beautiful silver. I should have used that yesterday, but I kind of forgot. I use these for Aladdin looks a lot. Magic Carpet and Poison Apple and Abu. Just such a good palette. It's so good. I love it so much. I can't rave about that palette enough. Okay, so then the next palettes we have are all in the back here. So back here I have my Natasha Denona Gold palette. This palette I bought because I actually exchanged a couple of things that Chip had sent me in her resend of the order that I had sent to her originally. So she basically got a second package for free, and she sent them to me. And I returned a couple of palettes or a couple of things that I wouldn't use. And I got myself a Natasha Denona palette because I would never ever pay for one of these palettes with my own money. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to get a store credit and I'm going to buy it because I really, really wanted to try one of the full-size palettes. So this is the gold palette. I do use this palette quite a bit. I just used it this past weekend, and I do really love the lid shades in this palette, but they do transfer a lot more than the little mini sunset palette, which I never got the full size because I never wanted to spend the money on that one. So I got the mini one, but I do have 3 Natasha Denona palettes in my collection now, and I would have to say this is definitely my favorite. I love this a hell of a lot more than the smaller ones. So it is a really good palette. The mattes in here are beautiful. They blend really beautifully. Honestly, I kind of love the mattes a little bit more. But my favorite shade in this palette is, of course, the gold, because it is called the gold palette. And I used this the last time I used the palette and the time before that. So I've used that shade the most on my lid, and it's so beautiful and foiled. I do love these shades here. I'm probably going to do a full review on this palette very soon. I just haven't gotten around to filming it yet. But this is a good palette. I like it a lot. And then we have one more palette back here, which is my one and only Juvia's Place palette. This is the Masquerade Mini Palette. You guys know my thoughts on this palette, but I'm just going to go over it one more time. Juvia's Place has really, really gorgeous, stunning foiled shadows, and I feel like this is a really good palette for someone who doesn't really have too many neutrals or colors in their palette, and they're kind of like wanting to dive into more colorful shades. The colorful shades in this palette are freaking stunning, like, and the shimmer shades in this palette are unreal. My favorite shade in this palette is Giza and Makita. Those two shades are so freaking foiled and stunning. Actually, Giza and Dahlia, sorry. Those are stunning shades. Casablanca is also beautiful. I love Zola and Dahlia and Mali. But the rest of these shades, Chi and Makita are okay. They're not like the best purple eyeshadows I've ever used. But, and Calabar's a beautiful shade as well. But the mattes in this palette are the most difficult mattes I've ever had to blend from any brand. Even Morphe was easier to blend, to be honest. They're just so dry and so hard to blend, and they kind of just crumble and blend away as you try to use them. So I mostly only use this palette when I want to bring out some color, and I'll use Zobo and Bori in my crease, and then I'll pop one of these on the lid. And they'll look beautiful and stunning, and the neutrals I do try and reach for when I can, but every time I use them I find them so difficult to blend. So that's why I like the color Raine palette more than this one. But I've never tried any other Juvia's Place palettes, but I really wish I would have waited to get the Magic palette, because once the Magic palette came out, I was like, oh my god, that's so stunning. But I still think that this was a really good palette to test out the brand. So it's good. It's not like my Holy Grail palette. Okay, so rounding out the last couple of palettes we have back here. Don't worry, it ends. This is my one and only Tarte palette. This is the Tarte Tartelette in Bloom palette. I think I used to love this palette a hell of a lot more when I first got it. Now I feel like every time I use it, I don't really like it too much. This used to be one of my favorite neutral palettes, but then like Tarte kind of had a lot of controversy. I do have pan in one shade in this palette. I did hit pan on Flower Child earlier this year, the one and only time I used this palette this year, but that made me very happy when I hit pan on it. So spoiler alert, I did hit pan on that shade. I've only hit pan on, I believe, 2 eyeshadows this year, but that made me very happy to hit pan on another shade in a palette. Because before this past year, I never had pan on any eyeshadows. But anyway, that's not what this video is about. The crease shades are good, and the lid shades are actually really pretty. Funny Girl is a stunning lid shade. That's my favorite. The rest of them are kind of lackluster. I do like these mattes a little bit more. But again, sometimes just Tarte eyeshadows or powder products don't really translate as the same color on the face as they do in the pan, and I found that with some of their blushes as well. But it's a good palette. I do like it. I definitely think this is the best Tartelette palette. In my opinion, I think a lot of people like this palette, but I would never purchase Tarte eyeshadows again. Just because they don't really interest me, and the rest of them are like too colorful, and I don't really wear colorful shades as much as I used to. So now we have a couple more Urban Decay palettes. I know I used to collect Urban Decay palettes like crazy. So this is the Urban Decay Afterdark palette, and wait, there's more Urban Decay palettes in my collection. So this is the Afterdark palette. Honestly, this is kind of like probably my least favorite Urban Decay palette. I don't know why I actually got this palette. I just loved the packaging on it. I was like, ooh, this is so pretty. But there are a lot of repeat shades in here, and that kind of annoys me about Urban Decay sometimes, is that they like to repeat certain shades, and I think that's annoying, honestly. Sinful is a shade that I've seen in palettes before from Urban Decay, and Fringe was in the Electric palette. I think that the rest of them were new shades. And honestly, the shades in here are beautiful. They are stunning, and I've used basically all of them over the years. I actually just pulled out Supersonic and used it and put Scene and Alter in the inner corners. So I have been getting a lot more use out of my palettes lately. It's just not a palette I really reach for, but they are beautiful shades. And I only keep it for collector's purposes, but they are really beautiful shades. I just really don't use it all that often at all. I used to use it more when I first got it, and I have used every single shade, except for Fringe, because I used to use that all the time in the electric palette. And I just don't find myself reaching for that anymore. But it's good. It's not like an essential in somebody's collection. Then I have the Urban Decay Moondust palette, and this one is the last Urban Decay palette in this drawer. And the packaging on this is so freaking adorable. I love that it's like very cosmic kind of packaging. And I kind of got sucked into the whole Moondust craze because so many people used to rave about these eyeshadows, like they were so glittery. And honestly, these shades really are beautiful. I use these more as eyeshadow toppers when I want like an extra pop of glitter. When I do like Doctor Who looks or like Guardians of the Galaxy looks, I love pulling out this palette because it's very space-like to me. I love using Vega and Galaxy on the lid. Element's beautiful. I've actually used all of these shades before. And they are very pretty, but you have to use a glitter base with them because they only perform really if you use a glitter base. The same thing with the Too Faced Glitter Bomb palette. I think I like this more than the Glitter Bomb palette because I think that these are a lot more glittery. A lot of people don't like this palette. I think it's a good palette though. I do like it. I just really don't use it half as much as I would like to. And then the last palette in this drawer finally is my one and only NYX palette. This is the NYX Happy Birthday palette. So this was a palette that was exclusive to Ulta that only came out for your birthday month. Or would only be, you would only be able to get it if you redeemed it as your birthday gift for Ulta. And I actually really do like this palette. I think it performs really nicely. I really do like NYX as a brand overall. And I just wanted to try NYX's formula for free. So this was a free palette. I was like, yeah, fuck yeah, I'm going to get it. And the mattes are beautiful. The shimmer shades are really pretty. So this performs really nicely. You obviously can't get it anymore. So that's why I don't really use it on my channel too much because you can't get it. But it's a good palette. I like it. This is probably one of my favorite drugstore palettes too. So now we're going to move on to the next drawer.